Welcome to the Brehm-Boucher Speaker Series. We are excited to be here with our first speaker, Ambassador Barbara Bodine, and our two sponsors, Carolyn Brehm and Richard Boucher, Ambassador Boucher as well. So thank you all for coming. I want to welcome the prospective students, incoming students, and current UNH students, our alumni, our faculty, staff, and a number of our friends as well. I definitely want to make a point to thank both our current UNH board member, Carolyn Brehm, and her husband, Ambassador Richard Boucher, for being so gracious with their time and their resources to help put this together for us. And obviously to the speaker, Ambassador Bodine, for taking the time out to come and share some of her words of wisdom, her exciting stories, and sage advice as well with our students, faculty, and staff. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Brehm. I want to briefly introduce her, and she will give a little overview of the series. So Carolyn is a graduate of Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service and the University of New Haven, where she got her MBA. Ms. Brehm began her career working for the U.S.-China Business Council, General Motors, and Procter & Gamble. She's also the founder and CEO of Brehm Global Ventures, LLC, a consulting firm that advises private sector businesses and entities on global government relations and public policy strategy. She currently is a member of the UNH Board of Governors and the primary sponsor, along with her husband, Richard Boucher, of the Brehm-Boucher Speaker Series, Making Policy in an Uncertain World. Now I have the distinct honor of presenting Ms. Carolyn Brehm. Carolyn?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Richard and I are so excited to kick this off. We talked about this series initially as something that we would bring to campus. And obviously, a pandemic got in the way. But we are finding, in fact, that it's a blessing in some respects to be able to offer this as a virtual platform, because we're able to get so many great practitioners who may not have otherwise been available at relatively short notice. So we are bringing our friends and other fellow practitioners to the students here at the University of New Haven, and delighted to have so many folks joining us this afternoon. So the notion was, and is to sort of talk about the rather volatile, crazy world we're living in through the lens of practitioners from international diplomacy, national security and intelligence, and the global business world, and how they have navigated past opportunities and challenges, and what this means and has meant for how they shaped and will be able to achieve successes in their career. And this is all through their storytelling. That's the whole concept of this notion. So with Ambassador Bodine, we are so excited because boy, does she have a lot of great stories to tell. And delighted that she is our initial speaker in what will be a 1 to twice a month series between now and November of this year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
Let me go ahead and introduce Richard, our next introducer. He is, I'll introduce him, and he's began his career at the State Department as an economic officer in China, then went on to serve as a U.S. ambassador to Cyprus, Consul General in Hong Kong, Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Africa, and the Deputy Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Currently, Ambassador Boucher serves as a senior fellow at the Watson Institute for International Public Affairs at Brown University, and he's also a great friend of the University of New Haven's National Security, Political Science, and International Affairs programs, where again, he and his wife, Carolyn, are namesakes and co-organizers of the Brehm-Boucher Speaker Series. And now I have the distinct honor, again, of presenting Ambassador Richard Boucher. Richard?
My job is to get us to the actual speaker today. So let me be brief, but let me talk a little bit about Ambassador Barbara Bodine. When Carol and I started thinking about the situation that many of the students find themselves in, and having made all kind of plans and then ended up dealing with something else that sort of overwhelmed everything in the form of the virus, we started thinking about our colleagues and people we've worked with who have faced many of those same situations. And The first one was Ambassador Barbara Bodine. I want to say things keep happening to her, but let's just say she was always at the center of the action, whether she planned on it or not. And so she's now at a relatively quiet job as a distinguished professor of practice of diplomacy, distinguished professor in the practice of diplomacy at Georgetown University. And she's also director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy, with a lot of good work and studies and case histories and things. But she spent 30 years in the Foreign Service. She ended up as ambassador to the Republic of Yemen, where she got an airplane wing and got hijacked in Djibouti. She was the deputy principal officer in Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. She was in Kuwait as the deputy ambassador there when Saddam invaded for the first time, first Iraq War in the 1990s. And then she went back to Iraq right after the Gulf War that you guys are more familiar with, as a senior State Department official and the first coalition coordinator for reconstruction. She got the Secretary's Award for Valor for the time she spent in occupied Kuwait, and she led a small embassy through a very difficult moment. And then she's done a whole host of other sort of academic, security, and foreign policy jobs. So she really has an enormous amount of experience, and I guess what I'd say is she's shown an incredible amount of resilience dealing with all these events and occurrences and things that kept happening all around her. So I think the only mistake I can say she made is she started out working on East Asia and Chinese, and then suddenly ended up in the Persian Gulf. And I would say a Persian Gulf at the time, which was, nobody really had much thought that anything was going to happen there. But once she arrived, things started happening pretty quickly, and it continued for decades. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Ambassador Barbara Bodine. Barbara, it's yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Carolyn and Richard, for inviting me to be the inaugural speaker, and to Chris Haynes and everyone else at the university who has been working with me and helping me get ready for this. To all the senior administrators and faculty, I'm delighted that you're with us. I'm really going to be speaking mostly to the students, and I will try to speak a little bit more briefly and leave more time for questions. The one downside of having been in the academic world now for 15 years is I have learned to be able to talk in two-hour increments. And so I'll try to restrain myself and go back to more of a diplomatic, see if I can keep it short and keep it focused. Yes, I did have probably a more exciting foreign service career than I anticipated. Most of the time, the trouble seemed to come to me. I will say that one other job that I had somewhere in all of that was that I was the coordinator for first counterterrorism operations and then counterterrorism overall. And when I was the coordinator for counterterrorism operations, I had, FBI SWAT teams and Rangers and SEAL Team 6 and all sorts of weird people working for me. And we would actually go to terrorist incidents in order to resolve them. And this was right after Kuwait. And my dear long-suffering father said, now let me get this straight. Most of the time you go someplace and it blows up. And now you've got a job where you wait for it to blow up and then you go there. Yeah, I said, okay, yeah, that's the short version. It was a great job, but a lot of time on airplanes. I want to just start with a little bit of background about who I am. I guess it was an non-traditional path from the beginning. I'm a first-generation college graduate in my family. A little bit of kind of context, my grandmother had a 6th grade education and still was one of the smartest ladies I ever met. But the idea of, going to college, certainly going to graduate school, and then certainly going into the Foreign Service was not an environment that I grew up in. And so even then I was sort of making decisions to do the non-conventional, the non-traditional, at least from the environment that I was in. And a lot of it was just, people say, well, then why didn't you just stay in, I don't know if there's any Californians, but in the west end of the San Fernando Valley. And actually, if anyone knows where I'm from, you will know exactly why I joined the Foreign Service, because it would get me as far from the west end of the valley as I could possibly get. The threat to send me 10,000 miles from home was seen to me as a promise. I did do a junior year abroad, which was the first time I had ever been out of the country, and I went to Hong Kong and was a Chinese studies major, and I already wanted to go into the Foreign Service, but I didn't really know what it was. And so by doing a junior year abroad, really did find that I liked living abroad. I liked living in other cultures. I liked immersing myself in something different. And I will tell you quite honestly, as a junior in college, I was sort of a groupie at the consulate. I was just fascinated by who these people are, and what they do. And a lot of it was finding out, is this my tribe? Are these my people? And discovered that, yes, this is exactly where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Was told to go to graduate school, so I did. And then 3 weeks out of graduate school, I was in the Foreign Service. And my idea was I was a Chinese studies major. It's 5 years learning Chinese. I was going to do Asia. I was going to do China. And I did Asia. And I loved it. But at one point, somebody came to me and said, we'd like to talk to you about a job in the Middle East Bureau, because we want you to work on security assistance and sales and things like that for the Arab Gulf states. And I said, well, that's very nice, but first of all, I don't think I've ever met an Arab. I don't know anything about the area at all. And, let's be honest, are they going to actually talk to me? Because I had all the stereotypic views of the Middle East. And I will say the people who were recruiting me actively said that, first of all, you have a strong background in security issues. We need that because we're changing believe it or not, when I took the job, we were still making the policy decision whether to sell fixed-wing aircraft to Arab Gulf states. And you look at the billions that we sell now, and the idea that it was a question when I started. But I was offered a job on an area, on a subject, in a region I knew absolutely nothing about. And it was going to take me off of everything that I had been working on academically and my first couple of tours in the department. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? Let's give it a try. Let's see what it's like. Worst comes to worst, I'll go back to Asia. I never got back. But I think that kind of openness to not being so rigid in your ideas about what your life path is going to be and where it's going to go and what you're going to be working on. I would say that almost every job I got in the department started with somebody calling me and saying, have you ever thought about, and then it would be some job that I had never considered in my entire career and often didn't know anything about, like being in charge of counterterrorism operations. What? And so a lot of it was just being open to the opportunities and the trajectories that you never imagined. And sometimes it landed me in some place like Baghdad during the Iran-Iraq War, Kuwait during the invasion occupation. It didn't always end up in the best places. I didn't get to Paris. But I never regretted any of those trajectories that I took. And if you kind of look at my bio and you look at the beginning and you see Asian Studies, Hong Kong, Bangkok, and then you see the end, Persian Gulf, Yemen, security and governance, it looks like I did a huge jump. But really what it was a whole series of like 10-degree trajectories, building off of something I had done, but it wasn't the core part. And I guess some of it also was that, you could call me and offer me some, harebrained job and I would take it. I actually did turn down some. To me, that's the fun part of the job, is that you're constantly being challenged by a new region, a new subject, a new crisis, something you haven't really thought about before. And you need to be able to bring everything to the table to figure out, what am I supposed to know about? What do I need to know? What am I supposed to do? What's our policy? What should our policy be if it's not the right one? And being willing to kind of jump in and give it a try. I don't know, maybe I have some form of attention deficit or something, but the more different it is, the more happy I can be. Which is why I just finished completely redoing my kitchen. The resilience part comes, and that's, yes, I was mentioning before we all got on that, Washington's very nice because nobody's shooting at me. There are questions about how do you deal with these crises that you're going to have. And I know that Richard has been through enough of his own as well, and Carolyn has been through her own. Things happen, stuff happens. And it's going to happen to you throughout your life. And, I know as parents, getting your children through their first heartbreak that I'm never going to love anybody again. And you kind of go, yeah, actually you will. That kind of stuff happens, and it's not the end of the world. It's not the worst thing that ever happened to you. For heaven's sakes, if you guys get through COVID and economic collapse and everything else that's going on, I'm really not quite sure what the world will throw at you for the next 30 or 40 years. It's going to be worse. But it's learning how to take on the crisis, to find out what your role in it is. What can you do to take care of yourself? What can you do to take care of the situation? And what can you do to try to make the situation better? And I suppose to me that's resilience, is keeping ownership of who you are, regardless of what's happening, and then taking some ownership of the situation in whatever way it is, and it may just be wearing a mask, but taking some ownership and then trying to find that place where you can start to make it a little bit better, to do something about it. I will say, I think of all of the weird things that have happened, the one that was actually the most difficult was the hijacking, even though it was brief, and yes, we ended up in Djibouti. It's not a place I would recommend anybody ever go. The hardest part about that one was that was the one crisis that I went through where there was nothing I could do. Absolutely nothing. We have a pilot, he's in charge of the airplane. Leave him alone. I can't go in there and help. I'm not going to wrestle the hijacker to the ground. I had absolutely nothing to do. And it was the first crisis where the best thing I could do was nothing. And that was extremely hard for me because I'm used to being proactive. I think some of the resilience also just comes from, again, it's not a question of getting out of your comfort zone. I like to think of it more as expanding my comfort zone. and just constantly making it a little bit bigger, trying something new, trying something different, going someplace else, taking on a new issue, and just making the comfort zone bigger and bigger all the time. I'm not really good at boxes, so we're just going to talk about pushing boundaries on comfort zones. Why go into the Foreign Service, particularly if you have no familial background in this kind of thing? I think very simply, I wanted to do something where I could make a difference, where there was some effect to what I did. Wanted to be a prime actor on issues and problems and policy, as opposed to being an observer. My fallback career was journalism. And to me, with all due respect to anyone who is or thinking about being a journalist, journalists would report on what was happening. The Foreign Service people were in there actually doing it, with all of the problems and all of the frustrations that go with that. So it was a question of purpose. It was a question of being able to act. It was, for me, a question of independence. I wanted to own my own life, and thought in the Foreign Service I could do that. So there was a lot of idealism, there was some adventure, there was the intellectual challenge of the issues that are real. And there was sometimes, there was more than one time in my career where I would look around at whatever I was working on or wherever I was, Kuwait, the Gulf, Yemen, Iraq, and just kind of go, whoa, this is a long way from the San Fernando Valley. And I'm not really quite sure how I got here, but I'm so glad that I'm here doing something. And let me sit down and figure out what I can do to make it better, fix it, do something. I do have stories that can go on for a very long time. The State Department does oral histories of us, and one of our colleagues sat down and was extraordinarily patient, and I ended up with a 400-page oral history, which I have not edited yet because I'm not interested. So I'm going to hold the stories to answer your questions as opposed to just continuing to babble on about why I think spending a life on an airplane, going to strange places you can't find on a map and eating food that you can't identify is really a super cool thing to do.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Bodine, for sharing those really cool stories about your past. And so I guess what we'll do now is we'll open it up to audience questions. And so the first person I see up is one of our really good students. She's a national security major, Marissa Lehner. Marissa?
Hi. So I guess my question is, looking back on it now, what do you think some of the most impactful experiences you had were, either as an undergrad or a grad student, that kind of led you to choose a career in the Foreign Service?
Yeah, okay. It actually goes back further than that. Goes back to high school. And the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, there was a small seminar on international relations for like 20 students from Los Angeles city schools. And I have no idea, but I got selected for it. And, which is great. I mean, it was my passion, it was my interest, but anyway. And anyone who knows California schools know that they're these great, big, huge, rambling campuses. And so somebody had to go to the flagpole, and the professor would have people come from the various consulate generals in Los Angeles and come and talk to us about their foreign policy and what they did. I now know it was probably the most junior vice consul who was sent out to talk to us. But when you're 15 years old, this 23-year-old looked really impressive. And so anyway, as one of the few girls in the class, I was one designated as the meter and greeter, so I would go out, and I started listening to these guys and went, wait a minute, they're actually doing something with international relations. To me, it was the front page of the LA Times, but I didn't know you could actually do anything with this. And so I actually, as I took, I think it was the Brit, and I said, what exactly is it that you do? I don't understand this. And so he explained foreign service, diplomacy, all of this stuff to this 15-year-old. And I said, oh, that sounds really neat. Can I join? And he says, you actually have one of your own. Oh, okay. And so we had to write 2 papers in this class. And my short paper was a research paper on the U.S. Foreign Service because nobody around me knew anything about it. And then my other one was on the Sino-Soviet rift, which dates me. And I got fascinated with the Chinese side of this dispute. And so at 15 years old, I said, okay, it's China, it's the Foreign Service, we're going for it. And I picked UC Santa Barbara because they had a strong Asian Studies department. They were also the head of the education abroad program, so I could go to Hong Kong for a year and become a groupie at the consulate. And it was just, this is the career, this is the region, and it was undergrad, Foreign Service exam, grad school into the Foreign Service. So I kind of did it backwards. At first, I kind of got the big idea to do diplomacy, and then I really spent the next 6 years really finding out what is diplomacy and what is the Foreign Service and what is required and building the intellectual skills and getting myself ready to do it. Most people kind of do all the intellectual academic stuff and then decide on the Foreign Service. And I did it, as usual, backwards.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marissa and Ambassador. I have another question from a student who does not or can't raise her hand for some reason, but is another excellent national security major. She's one of our head delegates for MUN this semester. So Jess Shamble. Jess, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Ambassador Bodine, I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time out of the day to come and talk to all of us here at the university. My question for you is, what did you find, not necessarily your breaking point, but what was that moment, like, if you had one in your career where you were like, you questioned what you were doing, and how did you overcome that? What was your most challenging, going from Yemen to Iraq to everywhere in between? Like, what would you say, what is that moment that strikes out to you?
Yeah, it was actually, anyway, the order that I did all those countries is not important. Yeah, I absolutely had days and times where I wondered if I was right for the Foreign Service, and that was particularly in my first several tours. I walked around with what we would now call imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Who am I? Why am I here? Being in Baghdad under Saddam Hussein while the Iran-Iraq War was going on was not fun. Certainly being a hostage for 6 months was not fun. But even in those two circumstances, while my personal quality of life was a little bit less than ideal, I was very much aware of why I was there and what I was doing. That sense of purpose, that sense of why am I here? I could answer that question. I think anybody who's in the Foreign Service or in any career has days and times, bosses they work for, policies they're working on that they kind of go, life is short, I don't need to put up with this. And I absolutely had days where I was, locked, loaded, and ready to go out the door. Also, sometimes when you don't get promoted the year, you think, so I'm out of here. But in those very dark moments, and I absolutely had them, I would really, sit down and have a conversation with myself about, okay, fine, so you leave. Then what? What are you going to do? What can you possibly do that is as important as working on your country's national interest, which is as exciting as getting all over the world into places that, I didn't know about. Where are you going to have this lifestyle? Where are you going to have this intellectual challenge? Where are you going to have this impact? And I would sort of look at that and kind of go, I can't answer that question. And it would be, okay, dust yourself off and, try to figure out, this is resilience, is, okay, why am I here? What can I do? How do I move forward? And, I'm not sure I should use these words with a whole bunch of students, but, don't ever let the bastards get you down. And, pick yourself up and move forward. You're going to get knocked down and you're going to want to quit. I've wanted to quit in my current job a couple of times. I don't think I've ever had a job that I didn't want to quit at some point. And for those of you who have even part-time jobs, I'm sure you've had days where you kind of go, life is short, I'm out of here. And then you just sit down and kind of go, okay, can I manage this? Is there a short time frame that I need to get through? What can I learn? I mean, I worked for one guy who was, God, he was awful. I actually had to take a hatchet away from my secretary. She swore it was because she was going on a camping trip, but I wasn't really sure she wasn't going to use it on the boss. So I took it away from her. And he was terrible. He was just awful on every count. And in retrospect, have said, I learned so much about management from him because he did everything wrong. And I could see what kind of an impact it had on morale, on people, our ability to do our job. And so, okay, fine, I'm going to learn why management and leadership that I've been taught and seen before is so important because I'm watching this complete jerk. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jess.
We're cleaning up my language. Sorry about that.
You're all good. So next up is another one of our STAR students. He's an international affairs major and former president of our MUN program, Doug Gordon.
Hello, Ambassador Bodine. Thank you for coming. And my question is, where Jess pointed out like sort of the lows of the career, I was just wondering on when there are those hectic moments of time, like if you could just like detail, like when there's like a monumental event going on and there's like, I'm assuming everything's extremely fast paced and everything. If you could, I guess my question is if you could walk me through that entire experience. So like when the hijacking occurred, like what are those times like in the Foreign Service? And if you have any interesting stories from that.
Yeah, the hijacking really is kind of, it only lasted several hours. There was absolutely nothing to do. We landed in Djibouti and I actually managed to get home in time to host a dinner party that night. So when people said, how was your day? It was an interesting set of answers. I managed to do a hijacking between breakfast and dinner. I think to answer your question a little bit more seriously, I think to what you're getting at, I think maybe the best example would be the attack on USS Cole in Aden Harbor, which happened on my watch. To kind of give a little bit of background, we had, or the Navy, U.S. Navy had begun to refuel ships coming into Aden Harbor. They showed up about every 2 weeks or so. Aden Harbor is very small, very quiet, no ships in it. It is not New York Harbor at all. And I was actually on consultations and was flying back to Yemen It's a long flight. I was actually flying from home, leave in St. Louis. And so I was flying from St. Louis to Chicago to Frankfurt to Cairo to Sana'a. And that's a long flight. And landed in Sana'a at midnight. And my deputy chief of mission, my number 2, was there to meet me, which he never, ever did. So I knew it was bad. And my question to him was, okay, what happened? And he said, a U.S. warship, an Aegis cruiser to be precise, blew up in Aden Harbor. Well, the verb he used made it sound like it had been like maybe an industrial accident. And I said, blew up? And he says, well, actually, it was blown up. Oh, that's an entirely different issue. Yeah, who blew it up? Well, probably Al-Qaeda. And he said, okay, I've just flown from St. Louis. It's midnight. And he said, I said, okay, well, what do we know? And what are we doing about it and everything else? And he didn't know anything, hadn't done anything. But he said, I have a ticket for you on the 3 a.m. flight to Aden. Thank you. So, good. As the DCM, you really should have had yourself down there, but, it's a whole set of different issues. And I got down to Aden and, went out to the ship at first light. And, at that point, we're dealing with a major terrorist incident. One of our major battle, Aegis cruisers has a hole so big in the side that it almost sinks a couple of times. And 17 sailors have been killed. And there is this, okay, what do we do now? And you talk about stuff moving fast. And, planes from the U.S. and other places started coming in. I had the foreign emergency support team, which is actually the team that I had headed in counterterrorism. It flew in with 2 tons of communication equipment. I had 75 Marines show up in battle gear. I had the FBI, the Joint Special Operations Command, the NCIS, and and the spooks. And they're all coming in at one time, and we're trying to figure out what's happened with the ship, figure out how do we get an investigation into what happened launched, and how do we start the intelligence gathering so that it won't happen again. And I go from having an embassy of maybe 30 Americans and nobody present in Aden. We didn't have a consulate or anything there. To having about 300 Americans, most of them heavily armed, from 7 or 8 different agencies. Most of these agencies did not get along with each other. And they all had different set of priorities. And we're moving very fast. You add to that we're 8 hours off of Washington. So we work all day, and just as we're sort of starting to wrap up at the end of the afternoon, Washington is waking up and is going to start asking and doing all sorts of stuff. So was working a Yemen work day and then a Washington work day, trying to organize 300 people from 7 or 8 different agencies and commands, and also working with the Yemenis because it is a sovereign state. First order of business, save the ship, secure the casualties. Second, launch an investigation. Third, protect all of these Americans. And fourth, try to keep the relationship with the Yemenis going, because we can't do any of those other things unless we have Yemeni cooperation. And while you can see how these things relate to each other, you can also see where they start to conflict with each other. And for example, for the Navy, this is a ship, and it's been damaged, almost sunk, and they've lost 17 of their sailors. So this is sacred ground to them, and they need to take care of the ship and the rest of their crew. To the FBI, the ship is a crime scene. And so they want to go in and, yellow tape it and start, looking for evidence and everything. Well, where they're gathering evidence is where the sailors have been killed. And the conflict between the Navy and the FBI as to, how do you respect the ship and the crew? How do you gather evidence? And then you've got the FBI and the CIA. The FBI wants to gather intelligence that can go to court so that you can prosecute people and put them in jail. Intelligence wants to find people that you can turn so that you can get information so that you can either connect it to other terrorism and certainly to prevent the next one. Well, gathering intelligence and developing intelligence and gathering evidence are also mutually exclusive. And so my job as ambassador was to try to get all of these different agencies with legitimate priorities and agendas to at least not get in each other's way and hopefully reinforce each other. That was a little bit too much. And then also keep Washington informed and happy. And then also work with the Yemenis. And I'm not really sure, I don't think I slept for about 3 weeks. Because, just everything had to be done almost simultaneously, and you had to keep all of these parts moving in coordination. Because if they got out of sync, something very bad would happen. And, I fortunately had a good team. I had some good people coming in. But, that was every diplomatic skill I have ever had in my entire career was all brought to bear on managing the aftermath of the coal. It was the most important thing I may have done, the most exhausting thing I ever did, and the one that, as I said, was sort of every skill, every trick, everything that I ever had, I had to bring to bear on that.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that was super interesting. Thank you very much.
One thing I do remember is that, we were in this hotel that was kind of like L-shaped. And my room was at the end of one of the L's, and my office was at the end of another L on, I think, the 7th floor. And for 3 weeks, I barely saw anything except this little gerbil run back and forth between those two. And sometimes we'd go 2 or 3 days without putting shoes on because I never went anywhere. But, sleep is for the weak.
Yes. All right. Next, we'll move on to another excellent student. He's a rising junior and another international affairs major, Aaron Ostroff. Aaron, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, I'd like to first thank you for speaking to us today. And my question is, in regards to stability in Yemen, how have your opinions changed from, say, the time of the USS Cole bombing to present day with the humanitarian crisis?
Just take your question one more step, just so I understand it.
I mean, like your hopes for future stability, because
yeah. I think any decent diplomat always has to be a little bit of an optimist, or you can't get up in the morning and go to work. And then you become a pragmatist at about noon. And then by the afternoon, it's just, okay, we're going to get through this. Yemen was actually reasonably stable. And even the coal was not a destabilizing element of Yemeni politics. It was a terrorist incident really planned, operated, and executed by Saudis. I know we're not supposed to say things like that, but it was actually a Saudi operation that was done in Yemen. But as I had to explain to some of the people coming into Aiden to work on the attack, is a hostile event does not mean that you have a hostile environment or a hostile government. And we didn't. We had a very supportive government and a very supportive environment, but we had an extraordinarily hostile event. Yemen was always wobbly. It's an extraordinarily poor country. It's one of the 20 poorest in the world. And the fact that they were as stable as they were for as long as they were was always something of a small miracle. I do an entire 14-week course on Yemen, so I'm going to really try to bring this down to the short version. It can become stable again, but the war has to end. The Saudis need to back out, and the Yemenis need to be given the space to come up with a sustainable political solution. And then the international community has to come in and give them the technical assistance and the money to rebuild a country. That there's a fascinating UNDP report that was done last year by a guy named Jonathan Moyer at the University of Denver. And he and his team, using all sorts of quantitative analysis I don't fully understand, has calculated that the 5-year war in Yemen has set back its economic and infrastructure development, all of those indices, 22 years. And for every year of war, it goes back at least 5 more years. And this was a country that basically didn't have an infrastructure and was already poor. So the first thing you have to do is end the war. The second is you have to let the Yemenis put together a credible political solution. And then you have to give them the wherewithal to rebuild this shattered country. Or it will never be stable, it will never be peaceful, and it will turn into another Somalia, which it doesn't need to be.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is another member, one of our members of our Model G20 team, Sanduni.
Hello, Ambassador Bodine. First and foremost, thank you so much for taking this time and giving us this opportunity to engage with you and learn from you. My question is, what is something that you wish you had known at the start of your career that you know now? It could either be a key takeaway or maybe a harsh reality that really taught you something different from the world that you once believed in.
Okay, so what do I wish I knew then that I know now?
Yes.
I hate those kinds of questions. Which is my favorite cat? I think what I actually, this is not the answer you're looking for, but I think the thing that I did not fully appreciate when I came into the department, as I said, I really didn't have, I didn't have all this kind of things that you guys have got. I did not fully appreciate how much you could do as a diplomat. I walked into it, with a very, I'm not even sure it was a romantic view. I don't think I really had a view. I didn't know. I will say that in my A100 class, which is the orientation class, and I was one of 2 women in my entering class, I said that I was going to stay for 10 years. I mean, I was 22, so 10 years was half my life, so that was about as far out as I could think. I didn't have any real idea about what a career, a life in the Foreign Service really meant. I think I thought it was just some place where I could play international relations for real. But I didn't understand what it was in the macro. And obviously I didn't, I got to 10 years and just blew right past it. When somebody says what it's like to be in your fourth decade in the Foreign Service, I went, oh my God, when did that happen? I'm not sure I would have done anything. I'm not sure I would have done anything different. And maybe it's good that I didn't really fully understand what I was getting into, because I probably would have been too afraid to do it. So my ignorance was actually one of my saving graces. I just kind of went in and kind of went, this is cool. There was a lot of learning that I had to do. As I said, I came in 3 weeks after I got my master's. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure the Foreign Service should have let me in that soon. I spent a lot of my first and second tour really learning what it meant to be an adult, and how to go from being a student and all of those things that were great fun. But it took me a little while to grow up. And I was very lucky that I had bosses and supervisors and people who were willing to help this 22-year-old survive until she could get tenure. So I think I wish I had just been more of an adult as opposed to just a geeky kid when I came in, and been able to do more effectively earlier. That's a weird answer, I know.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
All right, thank you. So next up is one of our current Boren scholars, Angelica Cruz. Angelica, would you like to unmute and ask your question to the ambassador?
Yes. First of all, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. My question is, you mentioned that you were offered opportunities once you were already in the Foreign Service that were different from the area of expertise you studied. For example, you talked about studying East Asian studies. So I was wondering if you found it challenging when you were offered different roles that were not so much related to what you studied, and how did you manage to adapt and translate the knowledge and the skills you held at the time to those new roles?
That's a really, really good question, because whatever your career you go into based on your education and what you want to do now, I can guarantee you that 10 years out, you're going to be doing something totally different. It's just things are moving too fast. I have students from my previous university who, I guess I've known them 12 years, and they're working in fields that didn't exist 12 years ago. And there are issues. I mean, when I came in, we didn't do counterterrorism. There's issues and places and things that it changes. I think when I was offered this job working on the Arabian Peninsula, which was just terra incognita to me, what I did, and I guess I took this forward with all of these strange tangents I took, I kind of defaulted back to, okay, you were an area studies major, you focused on China, and when you were doing that, you had to learn the history, the deep history, not the 3 week ago history. You had to know the deep history and the culture and the geography and the economics and how the society operated. And to really do area studies properly, you really get into all the nuances and pieces of that region. And then you also figure out how these things work together. And so when I suddenly found myself, working on the, Arabian Peninsula, that, okay, fine. What I need to do is I need to read the history. I need to learn about the religion. I got to figure out the dynamics. How do these societies work? What is the geography and everything else? And so I kind of took what I knew I needed to know when I was doing it in school, and then just asked myself the same questions. And I think this is the most important part. You need to always think through, what are the questions I need to ask about this new place or this new issue? And then do your own deep dive into it. I mean, at one point I also became the director for East Africa, which I also had never served in. And it was the same thing. Okay, fine. Find some smart people, find some good books, start asking myself, what are the questions I need to ask and where do I find the information? And, I just kind of constantly do that. It's one of the things that I loved about the Foreign Service is that you are always moving around to, even if you stay in one region, if you're going from Japan to Korea, that's not the same place. You have to relearn, what you knew about Japan is important for Korea, but it's not Korea. You're constantly having to refresh yourself. You're constantly having to relearn things. And you can't walk in with what I knew about China when I got my degree and think that, brain stops and I'm going to do 30 years of China at the point that I finished studying it. So you're constantly studying, you're constantly reading, you're constantly learning. I teach a course on Yemen, and I'm still reading stuff because it evolves and it changes. I do take my students through deep history. Their big joke is that we start Yemen 4,000 years ago because they really need to know really deep history. So learn the questions you need so that you can actually start understanding the issues. And that's how you can change and keep yourself fresh. Be interesting. Who wants to be boring?
No one.
Nobody. I don't know. There's some people who seem to be perfectly happy being really boring, but they're not on this call.
No, such sage advice. Thank you very much. I know our Associate Dean, Paulette Pepin, would definitely agree with your take on in understanding deep history behind these different cultures. So wanted to give her a shout out. The next student that I want to call on is Paige Nysonger, and Paige is our head delegate for our Model G20 team that is going to compete in the spring at American University. So Paige, you want to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Ambassador Bodine. So I wanted to ask a question. What was your experience with human intelligence officers? And in your opinion, what was the relationship between diplomacy and intelligence collection?
Okay.
If you did experience them.
Okay, the human intelligence officers of the spooks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I never called them a human intelligence officer in my life. They're part of the mix of any embassy, whether we admit it or not. And they bring an approach and a perspective that is absolutely critical. And I would say that, personalities notwithstanding, that the relationship between the station, give it its formal name, between the station and the diplomats tends to be very good. I think one frustration, and Richard can chime in on this, is sometimes getting not just the intelligence officers, but the other agencies that are represented in an embassy to really talk to each other. Sometimes there's a certain stovepiping, and getting my intelligence officers to actually sit down with my political officers and my defense attaché. At one point I found that all three of them were writing reports on essentially the same thing. And it was interesting because they had three different perspectives, but all of the reports would have been were stronger after they sat down and talked to each other. And, it wasn't just, the blind men and the elephant thing, but they could actually figure out that they had an elephant on their hands. So I think by and large, there are times when you do have to remind any number of elements in your embassy that you are the president's representative and they can't freelance too much. So you have a coordinating role. But, personally, by and large, I always saw the spooks as just kind of a variation on a Foreign Service officer. The difference is that we got our information by charm.
I love you, Howard. Thank you. So next up, I want to call on someone who messaged me in the chat, Katie Ambrosio, and she is another international affairs major and another one of our head delegates for MUN. So Katie, you want to ask your question?
My question is, for students that want to enter the Foreign Service, what are career or educational experiences that would set them apart or prepare them for a career in that field, or like any characteristics that would help set them apart?
Oh, okay. I mean, it's very odd. The Foreign Service doesn't have an educational requirement. You know, most other parts of the government, you have to have a master's, and it doesn't even matter from where. And the Foreign Service has no educational requirement, but you have to pass the exam. I mean, I think, you know, the real skills that you need to bring in are first the basic intellectual skills. You know, can you read and understand an issue? Do you know the questions to ask about the issue? Can you analyze it? And can you see solutions, make recommendations? That can be a background in history or international relations. And we have colleagues who, you know, one of my colleagues had an advanced degree in mathematics from MIT, but he was somehow able to take the thought process and move it over to diplomacy. So it's really learning those thinking skills. And so, you know, if you're an Asian studies major or a German studies major, it doesn't really matter. It's getting those thinking skills. It's getting those writing skills. You have to know how to write. And if you can write well, you're going to be fine. If you can think well and you can't write, stay home. And then the ability to articulate. It also takes, but there's a lot of smart people who can answer those questions. What distinguishes when we're looking for people to come in? You really do need to get some international experience doing anything. If nothing else, you need to know that you actually do like not traveling to, you know, the beaches of Mexico, but you actually like living in different places for long periods of time and not in a bubble, but actually living in the country. So you need to actually test that yourself and find out if you're actually willing to do that, you like doing that. You should get some good basic job skills. Do not come in as I did without ever really having had a job and try to learn on the job. I do not recommend that. But I think the other thing is you have to have, first of all, a passion for what you're doing. You really, whatever job you have, wherever career you go into, you need to be able to answer the question, why am I getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do this? And if you can't answer, why am I up at 4 o'clock? Then you're probably doing the wrong job. And it doesn't matter how you get to 4 o'clock, this way or this way. So you have to have a passion for it. It really has to be what you want to do, as well as something that you're prepared to do. I think the other parts that are much harder to quantify is you need to know yourself. You really have to be a grounded person. This may be for anything, but you really have to be well-centered, not egocentric, but well-centered on who you are. What are you interested in? What are your values? What are your principles? What are your ethics? Why are you doing something? Why are you being asked to do something? And I think the question of integrity, of that centeredness, is critically important. And people who just go into any job because they're going to make a whole lot of money, or they're going to get fame, or they're going to get this or something like. First of all, if you're looking for fame and glamour, please try option B. But have that sense of your center. And I think that's really important, that integrity, that passion, and then you can get the intellectual skills and the work skills. Once you get them in, is kind of open. It really is.
Thank you very much. That's great advice. Someone who you reminded me of while you were talking about all those different attributes is actually on the list as another questioner. So I want to call on her, Christy Santana, who is a graduate, former Boren Scholar, and she spent a lot of time already in Morocco and with a homestay. So Christy, you want to unmute yourself and ask a question to the ambassador?
Thank you for all your pointers so far, Ambassador Bodine. So my question is about career growth. And you talked about starting your career within the Foreign Service right out of graduate school and working your way up to senior level positions such as ambassador. What do you think made you stand out to work your way up to these positions? And were you interested in becoming an ambassador, or did it just kind of happen?
Yeah, in my A100 class, the one where I said that I was going to stay for 10 years, they did ask the question, who in the room, plans on becoming an ambassador? And I didn't raise my hand. I really didn't quite know what an ambassador was, and I was only staying for 10 years anyway, so what the hell? It's not luck. Yeah, there's an element of luck, but like all luck, it's a luck that you have built. Luck is preparation and opportunity coming together. It sounds really kind of weird. One of the ways that I stood out is that there weren't a whole lot of women in the Foreign Service when I came in. I literally stood out. Not always in a good way. It didn't always mean that I had a lot of support. But I did discover that, particularly as I became a little more senior, to be perfectly honest, people would remember me because I wasn't another guy diplomat. And so in a weird way, you are more memorable. That's literally standing out. I think I loved what I was doing. I was deeply committed to what I was doing. I am something of a perfectionist. And I will get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do my job. And so you'd really kind of have to ask the people who picked me out for jobs as to what they were looking at. But I think, at least like when I'm looking for people, I want to see somebody who knows what they're doing, why they're doing it, why it's important, and willing to put the time and effort into doing it right. And if they don't know anything about the issue, I can teach them the issue, if I'm the supervisor. So it's really as much those, and that's when I'm going in a circle, but it's those intellectual skills, those core intellectual skills, and those core personal qualities that will make somebody stand out. And I had an officer working for me once, and when I was leading the Arabian Peninsula office, and we had just gone to an award ceremony for one of his colleagues in the office. And he literally asked me as we were walking back when he was going to get his award. And I said, well, first of all, Kathy saw an opportunity for a major change in our approach to a policy and our engagement with one of the countries. And she has brought along the entire, first me, then the assistant secretary, and then the 7th floor to basically change policy. And she works really hard and she's really good. You, on the other hand, show up precisely at 9 o'clock in the morning. You leave precisely at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And you do, and he says, I do everything you tell me. I said, yes, you do what you're told. You have no initiative. You have never demonstrated a single original thought. And so, no, there isn't an award ceremony coming for you. He left the service, but not directly after that. So it's, what are you bringing to the job? You know, are you bringing your brain and your passion and your everything else to the job? If you're doing that, people will see you and they will want to have you there. Richard, do you want to chime in on that?
I think, you know, that's the answer. It's what do you bring that other people don't bring?
Yeah.
Everybody can do what's necessary. You know, when I was in A100, Dick Combs, one of the guys that was tutoring us, said, you know, sometime in your first 5 years, you're going to get a chance to show what you can do.
Yeah.
And I thought my moment, I was duty officer in the U.S. Embassy in Taiwan when we recognized the mainland. And there were riots and there were telegrams and there were reports and there was tear gas. And, you know, and I kind of thought, oh, this is my moment, you know? And it wasn't, you know, it just kind of, I got almost no recognition from the ambassador, which I hold against him forever. But it turned out, you know, it was just enough to get on the radar to get asked to go to Guangzhou, and we opened the consulate there. And that turned out to be my moment. When suddenly I was doing stuff, you know, I was dealing, you know, we used to say we had 180 million people to say hello to in our consular district, and none of them had ever met an American before. And they'd come through the Cultural Revolution, they'd come through the propaganda, the paper tiger and all that stuff. And I was able to say, hey, how about we do this? How about we do that? How about we do something else? And that was enough to establish a certain level of recognition in the China field. So, yeah, what you figure out and get done is more important than what anybody tells you what to do.
Yeah, and I think Richard makes a great point, and I'm gonna riff on it a little bit. Is your big break? You don't even know when you've done your big break, and actually, maybe nobody else kind of knows it too. When my second tour was Bangkok, and my supervisor, my boss, had it as an explicit goal, very explicit, to end my career. He was very clear about it. Women should not be in the Foreign Service, they should not be political officers, and they certainly shouldn't be in the political military section. So my job is to get rid of her. And I didn't know that he had said this before I even arrived. I did think that there was something weird when I was given my office and it had the refrigerator, the hot plate, and the coffee pot. He put me in the kitchen. Lacks a certain subtlety, I know. I thought this was the end of my career. Fortunately, the ambassador, that's a longer story, he's gone, I stay. New political military counselor comes in. He goes, great. You think being a woman is a problem being a political military officer? And I said, no. And he said, neither do I. And he started, you know, giving me the kinds of jobs and things. I'm still only a second tour officer, but all of a sudden I'm starting to learn and do things that I hadn't been able to do. Well, it was that job, doing political military work in Bangkok, that actually is what came to the attention of the Middle East Bureau. I didn't even know about the Middle East Bureau, but they were looking for somebody who knew about the military and security assistance and sales. And so when I said, you know, I've never met an Arab, and they said, we don't care, we have an entire office full of people who know Arabs. We don't have anybody who knows the difference between an M16 and an M60. One's a tank, one's a gun. And so they said, we want you to come because you have this functional expertise. And this was like the first, you know, major tangent. And so the break point on my career was not really getting the job in the Middle East Bureau. it's what I had done in Bangkok. And so it's the same thing that Richard's talking about. And so you also find that it is an iterative process, that, you go into one job, and then because you're doing that, you then are seen and thought of for other jobs. And then that goes to someplace else, and that goes to someplace else. So it's an iterative process. But yeah, Richard, I would agree that it's the thing that you think is going to be your breakout moment isn't, but it turns out to be the breakout for your breakout moment.
Barbara, I would add that corridor reputation is part of it too, that you begin to get a reputation.
Yeah.
People know you're good, you can stand up to the pressure. And for me, it was being in Moscow during the fall of the Soviet Union and everything that led to Tel Aviv and the U.S. mission to the UN, et cetera.
Yeah.
You're right, exactly.
Well, a former student of mine she was a Latin American specialist, and she started off in conflict and stabilization or operations working on Latin America. And she's super. And all of a sudden, Mali started to break open. And the Africa Bureau was breaking Mali and Mauritania into two different people. And they needed a Mali desk officer now, like right now. And she had this reputation already, sort of, people talk and people know everybody. And somebody was sort of going, I need a junior officer who can move right now, who, she can move fast, she can think well, she can write well. And someone said, you need to talk to Megan up in CSO. And I remember she called me and said, I've just been offered the Mali desk. Where's Mali? I mean, it wasn't quite that bad, but it was damn close, like me going, what's a Yemen? And she took it. It was completely off. And, she's rolling. So yeah, that corridor reputation is something you build iteratively, that you did something well here and somebody knows about it. And someone says, I really need somebody who can do X, Y, and Z. And they go, there's this guy named Richard Boucher or something like that. And he's bad on the China stuff. Why don't you talk to him? And they will completely destroy your name. But it doesn't matter as long as they know where to find you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Bodine, for spending some time with us and answering these questions. I really want to make sure we acknowledge that. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to again thank Richard and Carolyn for sponsoring this series, and Chris and everyone else from the university for putting it together. I really love talking to students. I for you guys, life is a future tense verb. And that is just so cool. You have all of this in front of you. And you've got all the weirdness and all the wackiness and all the tangents and all the instability to look forward to. And I so envy you having that chaos in front of you, because it's going to be so much fun.
Oh, excellent.
Ambassador, I have to jump in and, of course, add my thanks. But I want to jump in on what you said there and what you said before for the students here. You're in college, right, guys, gals? So you're in the ante room of your adult life, right? Your adventures. And the ambassador was so brave here to talk about her imposter syndrome, right? Well, that's what college is. Right? We're all there. We've all been there. It never really leaves completely, right? We all sit there, especially in college, and think, can I be her? Can I be him? Do I have what it takes, right? But what you do in college is take advantage of the opportunities that we keep, harping on you about. You get on that plane and you're the first group back with me to Prato and say, we can do this after the pandemic, right? You apply for that Boren scholarship, in February. And, I noticed we have 3 of our Boren scholars on here. We've got Angelica Cruz and Christy Santana and Mia Summers on here, right? They all are developing those adventures. You look at Christy, right? When she comes back in 30 years to give her talk as an ambassador, she's already got half her story started because she was stuck, right, in Morocco and couldn't get home during the pandemic. But when you do those things, right, or you travel with faculty, what you start to develop are the other things that everybody up here has been talking about, which is the leadership skills and the resilience that allows you to go, Mali, where's that? Yemen? They have good fish. I've heard that, right? And you go there. You pick that up and you go, because what you're doing in college, when you do that deep learning and everything else we've been talking about, right? The 11th century queen in Spain, right? And you think, well, what does that have to do with anything, right? When you do that, you're learning how to learn. And in a job like this, and frankly, in most of the jobs that you want to get into, that's really the job. The job is, can you keep learning? Can you keep training yourself to be that person that can take the initiative, figure out what needs to be figured out, because you're not going to be told what needs to be figured out, right? And then hang in there for the tough part. And so Ambassador, that's what I so appreciated hearing in these stories today. And again, just thank you so much for bringing that to alive for us.
Again, thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. And as I said, go out and get dirty and have a good time and do something useful.
So before we sign off, I just wanted to say thank you to Carolyn Brehm and Richard Boucher, as well as obviously to Ambassador Bodine and Matthew Schmidt, who's helped put this speaker series together. Absolutely. I'll leave the final word to Carolyn and Richard.
Barbara, that was awesome. Thank you. You left everyone, I think, feeling inspired and ready to dig in the next semester. Thanks so much.